Okay, let's talk about Galileo. You know the story, right? This lone genius of science, this hero crushed by the dogma of the church. It's probably one of the most famous showdowns in all of history. But what if that story, the one we all think we know, is mostly a myth? Well, today we're going to set the record straight.
I mean, you can just picture it, can't you? There's Galileo, this brilliant astronomer, standing before the all-powerful Catholic Church, being forced to take back his heretical idea that the Earth, it goes around the sun. It's always framed as this ultimate showdown, you know? Reason versus religion, science versus dogma. And yeah, that's the dramatic legend we've all been told for centuries.
So this whole narrative, it frames the whole thing as this really simple black and white conflict. You've got the good guys, the scientists, and the bad guys, this ignorant, anti-science church. But you know what? History is almost never that simple. It's way more interesting, actually. So let's dive in and see what the historical record really has to say.
All right, let's do this. Time to set the record straight. We're going to put the myths right up against the facts.
Okay, myth number one. The church had this rigid official doctrine that the earth stood still. Well, that's just flat out wrong. See, at the time there was no formal doctrine on it at all. The church's view was really just a theological consensus that was based on, get this, the accepted science of the day. We're talking about Aristotelian cosmology. So this wasn't a case of dogma versus science. It was actually the old scientific consensus being challenged by a brand new one. Big difference.
And then there's this idea that Galileo had this definitive, knockdown proof. The legend makes it sound like he'd figured it all out. But the reality? Heliocentrism was still a really hotly debated hypothesis. Seriously, there were major scientific objections to it at the time, and Galileo himself, well, he didn't have a slam dunk argument. In fact, one of his main proofs, the one about the tides, was actually wrong. And he totally dismissed Kepler's ideas about elliptical orbits, which we now know were right. The point is, even the scientific community itself wasn't sold yet.
Now this is maybe the most surprising part of the whole real story. Galileo himself, far from being some kind of enemy of the church, he was a devout Catholic. He argued that the Bible could not be wrong. His whole thing was based on what's called the two books doctrine. The idea is super simple. God reveals truth in two ways, through the book of Scripture, the Bible, and through the book of nature, or his works. So for Galileo, if science proves something about nature, then it was our job to figure out how to interpret Scripture to match it. His goal was always to reconcile faith and science, not to start a war with the church.
So, okay, if it wasn't this simple battle of science versus religion, then what was really going on? What was the actual conflict about? Well, the answer is a little more philosophical. And honestly, it's way more interesting than the myth.
It all came down to the real debate, a fundamental disagreement about what science even is. A clash between two big ideas, instrumentalism versus realism.
So, first up is scientific instrumentalism. Now, think of it this way. A scientific theory is like a really useful tool, maybe like a calculator. It helps you predict stuff, it makes the math work out, and it explains what you see in the sky. But, and this is the key part, an instrumentalist says it doesn't have to be literally true. It doesn't have to be a perfect picture of reality. As long as the tool works, that's all that matters.
Then on the other side, you've got scientific realism. This is the complete opposite view. It says the whole point of science is to give us a true description of how the universe actually is. It's not just a tool. It's supposed to be like a photograph of reality. So a realist believes that when a theory says the Earth orbits the sun, it's describing what is physically happening out there.
And this right here is the absolute crux of the whole affair. The church, represented by guys like Cardinal Bellarmine, was totally fine with the sun-centered model, but as an instrument. They were instrumentalists. They were basically saying, hey, this is a great tool. Use it to calculate where the planets are going to be. Awesome. But Galileo, he was a realist. He insisted it wasn't just a useful tool. He was saying it was physically, literally true. So the clash wasn't over using the model. It was over Galileo's philosophical claim that his theory was the one and only reality. A claim that, remember, he couldn't actually prove yet.
I mean, this quote just nails it, doesn't it? The dispute was about these deep philosophical questions about what science even is. It wasn't some simple story of political or religious suppression. It was a debate about what we should expect science to do for us. Is it just about giving us useful tools to make predictions, or is it about finding the literal, capital T truth about everything?
So, okay, why does any of this nuance matter? What's the big takeaway here?
It matters because that simple, easy legend of science versus religion totally hides a much more fascinating and honestly a much more relevant story. The real Galileo affair was this complex, messy mix of brand new science, a really deep philosophical debate about truth itself, and of course, theological tradition. When we reduce all that down to a simple cartoon, we're not just getting the history wrong, we're doing a huge disservice to everyone who was actually involved.
And you know what? That philosophical debate is absolutely still with us today. Just think about something like quantum mechanics or string theory. Are those theories just really, really useful tools that let us make incredible predictions? Or are they actually a true picture of what reality is like at the most fundamental level? That central question from the Galileo affair: when is a scientific theory just a useful tool, and when is it the truth? Yeah, that's a question we are still wrestling with right now.